Where do you think the world is going? Sometimes it looks like things are getting better. Other times things seem to be getting worse. And a lot of the time it looks like chaos. But what if I were to ask you a more personal version of that question? Where do you think your life is going? Our answer to both those questions will partly depend on our experience of life so far. As we look at the world around us, it's easy to spot the many good things we humans enjoy. I call them the F's: fun, food, family, fitness, friendship, falling in love. But even if you've lived the most sheltered life, you'll have encountered some of the D's as well: disappointment, death, divorce, depression, disease, disorder in the world. In a word, darkness. The Bible is 100% realistic about the darkness we experience, but it also speaks of hope. Listen to these words from a part of the Bible called the book of Isaiah, chapter 9 and verse 2. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. Every dark path needs a light at the end of the tunnel. Every sad story needs a turning point if it's going to have a happy ending. Every person needs a hope worth having. And that's exactly the kind of hope this verse is talking about. It was written in around 700 BC to an oppressed people living in Judah, in modern-day Israel, just east of the Mediterranean Sea. It's part of what's called a prophecy, a message from God to his people, delivered via a human messenger called Isaiah. Isaiah's message was that someone was coming who could turn things around for hopeless people. Someone was coming who could bring light into the darkness. Listen to this. He will be called Wonderful Counsellor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Now, I don't know whether you believe that there's a God out there. Many of us like to think that there is, or at the very least, we hope that there's something more than our material universe, some bigger reality that makes sense of the story of life on earth. But if there is a God out there, it would be great if he proved it. And the claim of the Bible is, he has. The Bible says that 2,000 years ago, someone showed up who was that person God had promised through Isaiah to send. The Wonderful Counsellor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, came to earth. And that turning point in history can give us hope today. I don't expect you to believe that just because I say it. In fact, please don't believe it just because I say it. Instead, I'd love you to look with me at some of the evidence for that claim. A gospel, a historical biography of a man named Jesus, who was born in Israel, grew up in an obscure town, and started his working life as a carpenter, but went on to become the figure at the centre of the world's largest religion. The book is called Luke, named after the doctor who wrote it. He interviewed eyewitnesses of what this Jesus said and did, and wrote it up in around 60 AD. In Luke chapter 8, he tells us about one single day in Jesus' life. We're going to look briefly at just two snapshots from that day and see how they relate to one of the titles Isaiah used, Mighty God. The first incident takes place on a lake. Luke 8, verse 22. One day Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's go over to the other side of the lake." So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Master, Master, we're going to drown." He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm. "Where is your faith?" he asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another, "Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him." Imagine the disciples' desperation as their routine boat trip turns into a life-threatening emergency. This is not just your average storm. In fact, it's more like a hurricane. It's what happens when the cold air from the mountains meets the warm air around the Sea of Galilee. It produces this type of typhoon on the surface of the water. But when faced with the horrors of this hurricane, Jesus stands up and says, "Quiet, be still." And it is. Here is a man with the power to control the uncontrollable. Here is a man who can turn things around. The wind and the waves don't have ears, and yet when Jesus speaks, he can calm them. So the disciples are left asking the right question. Who is this? Who can do something like that? What category do you put him in? If he can calm a storm with a word, he's clearly not simply a teacher or a philosopher or a healer. Who is he? This matters to us because it's not just about lakes and storms and fishing boats. It's about the things that make you lie awake at night because they're out of your control. The question marks that cloud your future. The hard things that threaten to overwhelm you. Wouldn't it be amazing news if there were a mighty God with the power to control them? That wouldn't make hard things easy, but it would be reassuring that behind the universe stands a mighty God who is running the show, who is working things out. So consider this. Could this man Jesus be that mighty God? Could it be that Jesus is the mighty God promised by Isaiah, now walking on the earth he created and commanding it with his words? Maybe though the calming of the storm was a stroke of luck, a happy coincidence, a one-off. Let's look at a second snapshot from later that day after Jesus had got off the boat and walked into a town. Luke 8, verse 41. A man named Jairus, a synagogue leader, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. There's nothing more agonizing than a parent losing a child. This little girl, she's Jairus' pride and joy, the light of the house, but now she's seriously sick, and there's nothing Jairus can do. He'd fix this if he could, but he can't. He's desperate. So he throws himself at the feet of this man he'd heard has miraculous powers and begs for help. Now, if Jesus is just a carpenter, what can he do? He can offer to make a lovely coffin. But the question is, can he do more than that? Jairus is about to find out. They set out for his house together. But Jesus gets delayed on the way, and before they get there, Jairus hears those horrific words that every parent dreads. Someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter's dead," he said. "Don't bother the teacher anymore." It's like a punch in the stomach. All Jairus' worst nightmares have come true. His wife will never be the same again. But then Jesus speaks. "Don't be afraid, just believe, and she'll be healed." When someone's lost a child, you don't play games with the parents. This is a big claim. He better be able to deliver. He better be more than a carpenter. What's he going to do? When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her. "Stop wailing," Jesus said. "She's not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. That's the laugh of the playground. "Who do you think you are? She's dead. These poor parents. Don't dangle this false hope in front of them." But it's not false hope. Listen to what happens next. Jesus took her by the hand and said, "My child, get up." Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Jesus can raise a child from death just as easily as we might rouse a child from sleep. He's not just a carpenter. He's not just anything. He has the authority to turn chaos into calm. He has the power to turn grief into joy. What category is big enough for him? Luke is showing us here, and throughout his biography of Jesus, that there's only one category big enough: mighty God. Isaiah brought the promise. Luke is showing us how it started to be fulfilled as the mighty God showed up and did things that only a mighty God can do. Most of us hope that there's something more to life than meets the eye, or someone out there who makes sense of life's muddle and mess. Jesus shows us what kind of someone there is out there. There's a mighty God who gets involved in his creation, who's interested in the details of our lives, who cares about our joys and our tears. We're right to hope for more, for better. The great claim of Luke's Gospel is this: there's a mighty God out there, and he came down here, and his name is Jesus. He's come to this world, and he cares about this world. And what if that turning point in history could turn things around for you today? What if, with Jesus, the saddest part of the story is not the end of the story? You see, the Bible tells a unique story about where the world is heading. It says that one day the mighty God will come to earth again, and when he does, everything that he did on a local individual level 2,000 years ago, he'll do on a global cosmic level. The calming of the storm, the raising of the little girl, they're like a thumbnail preview of an entirely new world. A world where all the uncertainties are brought under control. A world without sickness or grief or death. That is deep down the world we're all longing for. And if we want to be part of it, then like Jairus and the disciples, all we've got to do is come to Jesus for help. That's the hope that has turned my story around. When I got that phone call at age 16 telling me that tragedy had struck close to home, I was crushed. I thought I'd never feel hope again, but in the weeks that followed, my brother gently came alongside me and told me that Christianity wasn't about the things I'd always assumed it was. It was about Jesus. And as I looked at Jesus in places like Luke's Gospel, he brought hope alive. Could Jesus do that for you too? Having this hope changes nothing, and it changes everything. We may still experience those D's: disappointment, death, divorce, depression, disease, disorder, and darkness. But we'll travel through them feeling sadness, yes, but never despair. Because with Jesus, the worst thing is never the last thing. And it's as though we're living in those last exhausting few minutes of a sports match. If we're well ahead on the scoreboard, then whatever hits we may take before the final whistle, we can withstand them because we know we're going to win in the end. And having this hope means that we can enjoy the good things, the fun, food, family, fitness, friendships, falling in love, without that nagging fear of losing them someday, because we know that even sweeter days lie ahead. That's hope, real hope. That's a joyful expectation for the future based on true events in the past, which changes everything about your present. That's the spark that can bring a smile to your face. And Jesus stands with his hands outstretched, inviting us to experience it for ourselves.